Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. The Color Purple. By Alice Walker. Alice Walker published her first book, The Color Purple, in 1982. The story is conveyed through 90 letters that the protagonists have written to one another. Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and National Book Award for Fiction were awarded to the book during the year of 1983. In 1985, Steven Spielberg directed a critically acclaimed film that was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, based on the book. Celie, a 12-year-old girl, lives with her father, a sex and physical abuser, at the beginning of the novel. Mr., the man Celie's father marries her to, subjected her to much of the same abuse that her father had subjected her to. Shug Avery, a jazz singer and ardent advocate for women's rights, is Mr.'s other girlfriend. Celie and Shug begin a sexual relationship after meeting. In the end, Celie and Shug run away together to Tennessee, where Celie launches a flourishing fashion business. Celie, on the other hand, returns to her homeland in Georgia and realizes that things have progressed since she left. Celie inherits her father's house, and she and Mr. become close because of their common love of Shug. Over the course of 40 years in the early 20th century, the story of The Color Purple is conveyed through the use of 90 individual letters. Celie, the primary character, is a 14-year-old girl who writes a letter to God in the opening letter. She writes about her father's sexual assault of her and how he told her not to tell anyone about it in the letter she wrote to her mother. When Celie's mother was ill, her father, Alfonso, began raping the girl. As a result, Celie has previously had a miscarriage, but her father killed the baby after it was delivered. When Celie's mother found out she was pregnant, she chastised her for it and demanded to know who the father was, but Celie doesn't want to tell her about Alfonso's abuse since he warned her that it would destroy her mammy. Until now, she has told her mother that it is a gift from God. It was God who took the kid, Celie says her mother after Alfonso snatches the child. As Celie's mother succumbs to her illness and dies, she curses her daughter. It is not Alfonso who takes the baby away from Celie after the death of her mother, but he does not kill it. In Celie's opinion, he sold it to a couple. Without a child to care for her, Celie is forced to deal with the after effects of delivery on her body. After their mother's death, Celie fears that Alfonso will begin raping her younger sister, Nettie, and she swears to protect her. Celie's age is soon reached by Alfonso's new bride. Celie says that the sexual assault he inflicts on her will continue. Despite the fact that Celie claims she wasn't winking at the boy in church and merely had something in her eye, Alfonso beats her one day. Later, for dressed badly, he hits her. Nettie's interest in Mr., a man Celie exclusively refers to as Mr., grows quickly. Mr. is a divorced father of 3. Her lover recently murdered his wife. New wife Alfonso tells the girls that Mr. has a girlfriend named Shug Avery, who is also a lover of Mr.'s. Celie is enthralled by a picture of Shug, a beautiful and sexy woman. Celie wants to get Nettie out of the house before their father starts abusing her sexually, so she encourages her to accept Mr.'s advances. Alfonso, on the other hand, feels that Nettie is too young to marry a guy with 3 children and refuses to allow Mr. to court her. It becomes clear to Nettie that Alfonso is sexually assaulting Celie, and Alfonso's new wife. When Celie verifies this, Nettie vomits in disgust. The new wife of Alfonso breaks down in tears. Despite the fact that he admits she is ugly and has been spoiled twice, Alfonso offers to let Mr. marry Celie instead. Celie accepts Mr.'s proposal of marriage in its place. It's hard for Celie to deal with the fact that she doesn't want to be married and wants to continue her education instead. In response to her father's claim that she is too foolish to learn anything, she is sent to marry. When Celie gets married, she has to take care of Mr.'s children on the big day. It has been 12 years since Harpo, Mr.'s eldest kid, died in her arms, and he has been emotionally troubled ever since. He beats Celie with rocks and punches her till she's bleeding profusely. Celie learns that Mr. has 4 children, not 3. As she tries to comb their hair, his girls curse and kick her. She spends the day taking care of them. The thought of Nettie is all Celie can think about as she goes through the motions of being married. When Celie is out and about in town, she comes across a young girl she believes to be her daughter. She names the child Olivia. In her mind, the baby she is carrying looks perfectly like her in every way. She gets in touch with the mother of the young lady and offers to transport her home in Mr.'s wagon if she needs it. Celie discovers the child's name is Pauline and that she will turn 7 soon after she asks a few questions about her. Celie and Mr. take in Nettie when she runs away from home. In the course of the story, Nettie tells Celie that Mr. is still interested in her and that he's paid her compliments. When Nettie turns down Mr.'s advances, he decides to expel her. Nettie is sent into town by Celie in order to find Pauline's parents, the Reverend and his wife. She is instructed to stay with them until Celie can intervene. She tells her sister she'll be okay, but in the letter she reveals that she never hears from her again. Celie. On one of Mr.'s sister's visits, Kate and Carrie show their affection for Celie. That Mr.'s former wife was a lousy cleaner and a bad mother, but they tell Celie that she's doing a terrific job. They tell her that Mr. used to abandon his wife and go off with Shug Avery for days on end. Mr. is taken aback when Kate tells him that she expects him to get Celie some new clothes, and Kate rebukes her brother for failing to do so. His compromise allows Kate to take Celie out for some much-needed retail therapy. Shug Avery's best friend Celie proposes purple as the color she believes Shug Avery should wear while they're out shopping. When Kate finally departs, she tells Celie to take up arms against Mr. anytime she feels mistreated. Celie, on the other hand, is unsure about the value of a battle with him. Celie longs to see Shug Avery when she returns to town to perform at a neighborhood bar, but Mr. is the only one in the family who has ever seen Shug. Celia can't help but want to know more about the mysterious Shug when Mr. returns from his weekend with her. As the eldest of Mr.'s children, Harpo is the one who tells Celie he has fallen head over heels in love with a local girl named Sophia, but that Sophia's parents will not allow him to court her due to the scandal in his family. Harpo and Sophie's marriage is unavoidable, though, due to Sophie's pregnancy. Condemning Harpo and Mr. with her unwavering defiance, Celie admires Sophia for her fierce temperament. On Mr.'s land, Celie helps the newlyweds fix up an old shack so they may move in. When Harpo's new wife's exuberant personality becomes too much for him to bear, he consults his father and Celie for advice. Celie follows Mr.'s instructions because she has done so many times in the past. That's not until much later that Celie worries if she has offended Sophia's spirit by telling Harpo to beat her up. Celie is unable to sleep as a result of her thoughts about this. Harpo's attempts to punish his wife with physical punishment fail miserably, and she injures him more than he injures her. Sophia confronts Celie after discovering that she advised Harpo to beat her, and Celie says that she is jealous of Sophia's ability to stand up to her husband without fear of reprisals. Sophia rekindles her friendship with Celie as she sees how sorry she is for her plight. As a result, Celie is able to sleep well once more. It is soon hypothesized that Shug Avery's condition is the result of a sexually transmitted disease in the community. The town turns on her and her parents refuse to take her in and care for her because of this controversy. Mr. returns home with a sickly Shug. Shug's wit and sarcasm persist despite her frailty. Celie's first words to her are, "You're hideous." Celie's obsession with Shug only grows greater after she learns more about the woman's real characteristics. When Celie finally gets to see Shug naked for the first time and admits to her letters that she is sexually drawn to her, she is enamored with the woman. Shug and Celie get closer as Shug's condition improves. The relationship between Shug and Mr. is revealed for the first time to Celie, who finds that the woman refers to him by his given name, Albert, and also treats him harshly. He admits that he has been working out and gaining weight in an effort to match the size of his wife and use that as leverage against her. Unlike the previous time, Celie gives him sound advice, telling him not to hit his wife and not to model his union on the unhappy one she and her father had. Sophia and Harpo's marriage, on the other hand, deteriorates to the point where Sophia decides to move in with her sister and their infant son. When Harpo learns about this, he becomes distraught, and Celie notices him crying in private. Shug's health improves to the point where she begins to pack her bags and get ready to depart. Shug has become a part of Celie's life, and Celie believes that she loves her. During Shug's absence, Celie confesses to Mr. that he beats her and that she believes he does so because she isn't Shug. When Shug is certain that Mr. will no longer be able to beat Celie, she agrees to stay. Shug tries to draw Celie along, and she finally opens up about her feelings for sex. Even though Celie claims that she doesn't like sex, she acknowledges that she will pretend to be somewhere else if Mr. forces it on her. For the first time, Celie had the audacity to peer at her own private parts in a mirror, thanks to Shug. Celie says she is glad she did it because she has finally realized herself for who she is and what she is capable of. After a few days, Sophia is spotted out and about with a new man. Squeak, Harpo's new lover, sees her dancing with Harpo and attempts to attack her, but Sophia punches her back, gravely injuring her. Sophia, on the other hand, is quickly in hot water for refusing to work as a maid in the mayor's mansion because of her strong sense of independence. As punishment for her impoliteness, Sophia smacks the mayor across the face, and in the process she knocks him to the ground, landing her in jail. Celie sees Sophia in jail and discovers that she has been battered and damaged to the point where she can hardly stand. The family decides to do something about Sophia's incarceration back home. They dress Squeak up in a lovely outfit so that she can meet the white prison warden and tell him about Sophia's plight. Instead of releasing Sophia, the warden viciously rapes Squeak, who is sent home covered in blood and hobbling as a result of the incident. It's decided that Squeak would help marry Agnes, the maid of the mayor, instead of Sophia, who is sentenced to a life of servitude. Shug breaks the news to her family that she's planning something special. Grady is the name of her husband. Mr. and Celie have an immediate aversion to Grady and lament the fact that Shug has wed someone else instead of them. Shug's career as a singer has also flourished, and she is now quite well known. She inquires about Celie's sex life and inquires if it has improved. Celie insists that it hasn't happened. That night, Shug spends the night in Celie's bed, and the two begin to converse. Shug is the first person to whom Celie opens up about her past. Shug kisses her and they have sex after she begins to cry. Shug reveals to Celie that Mr. has been concealing letters that Celie has been getting from Nettie, thanks to Celie's help. In order to read the letters, Shug helps Celie locate them. In the letters, Nettie discloses that Mr. attempted to rape her when she initially left Celie's house years before. He roared at her, "You'll never see Celie again." When she escaped, the Reverend and his wife, Corinne, welcomed Nettie into their home. They eventually made their way to Africa to carry out missionary work there. Nettie discovered that Pauline, whom they call Olivia, and Adam, the couple's two children, were in fact Celie's children who were given away by her father. After discovering Mr. had hidden her sister's letters from Celie, Shug tries to calm her down, but Celie stays irrational in her anger. When Nettie returns to the United States, she decides to break up with Mr. since she no longer feels threatened by him. A chat that Nettie had with the Reverend reveals to Celie that Alfonso was not Nettie's biological father and that her mother had remarried. The Reverend was chosen to adopt Celie's two children because of his friendship with Alfonso, but he claims he was told they were Alfonso's wife's children. When Celie learns that her father isn't who she thought he was, she quits writing to God and begins writing to Nettie. Shug decides to travel to Tennessee and begs Celie to join her there as her companion. As long as she gets to visit Alfonso first, Celie is on board. Upon their arrival, they discover that Alfonso has built a new house and married an adolescent girl named Daisy, who is 15 years old at the time. Alfonso discloses to Celie that he was her stepfather and that her biological father was lynched. In the local cemetery, Shug and Celie are unable to locate the grave of Celie's father. Shug reassures Celie by kissing her and saying, "Us each other's people now." It is revealed that Nettie is related to the children, but Corinne, who is suspicious of Nettie's relationship with the Reverend, initially refuses to trust her. Nettie finally persuades her and reminds her of the day she first met Celie, which eventually convinces her. Soon after, Corinne succumbs to her illness and dies. To help Celie see God as someone more than an old white man, Shug has her confess to him her lack of devotion to God in a letter. Sophia's tyrannical service to the mayor ultimately ends after 11 years, and she is freed. There are no other options for her, as her children are now all married and living elsewhere. They have since married and now have a child of their own, Harpo and Squeak. In the middle of the night, Shug tells Mr. that she and her husband would be bringing Celie to Tennessee. He has been mistreating her for years, and Celie eventually gets fed up and tells Mr. to his face that he must make amends. Except for Squeak, the rest of the gang is taken aback by Celie's outburst and reveals that she will be joining them in Tennessee. Celie begins sewing in Tennessee and, with Shug's assistance, eventually opens her own business. In order to attend the funeral of Sophia's mother, Celie travels back to her hometown of Georgia. Her first impression is that Mr. has undergone significant transformation. He is now hard at work and responsible for cleaning his own home. His illness occurred after she departed, and Harpo was the one who brought him back to health. She discovers this. Harpo and Sophia are back together again. Celie has taken over Alfonso's farm and home after his death. Move-in day is finally here. The Reverend and Nettie are now married and on their way back to the States. Adam, on the other hand, is happily married to a woman he met in Africa and fell in love with there. Celie is devastated to learn that Shug is considering an affair with a much younger man. Shug finds that Mr. is the only one who understands Shug's grief because she cheated on him, too. Celie comes to discover that she no longer dislikes Mr. since Shug has a soft spot for him. As Adam and his new wife make their way to Celie's house, Nettie and her family show up unannounced. Celie and Nettie are particularly moved to tears upon their return home. Despite the fact that Celie's children are now adults, she recognizes that she is actually the youngest she has ever been at this point in her life. Celie is the novel's protagonist. Throughout the book, Celie ages from 14 to 44. Celie's father physically and sexually abuses her as a child, and she begins the story as a young girl. God is Celie's lone confidant after her father informs her she can't tell anybody about the abuse she's been subjected to. Celie's faith in God is tested throughout the story, and at one point she appears to abandon it. To escape her father's and husband's rape and violence, Celie began writing her letters to her sister, Nettie, at the end of the novel. When Shug Avery tells Celie that God is not a man but an abstract concept, Celie seems to reaffirm her religious beliefs near the end of the novel, which is likely due to Shug's influence. To whom is Celie's final letter addressed? Dear Everything. Dear God. Celie has learned a great deal about herself and her place in the world, in addition to learning about her religious views. It is a remarkable transformation from a frightened, sexually abused child to a confident, empowered woman. Mr. Celie's husband. Despite his omission of the final name, Mr. goes by the first name Albert. Mr. is a controversial figure in the comics. Mr., the book's main antagonist, is shown to have a more vulnerable side when he comes into contact with Shug Avery. He not only puts up with her dating and marrying another man, but he also appears to be deeply in love with her. In this sense, he shares Celie's desire for Shug Avery, and the two eventually become friends because of their shared admiration for the singer. Mr., on the other hand, is a terrible tyrant who demands his own way and refuses to see women as equals or as individuals in his dealings with Celie. Shug Avery is a jazz singer who gains popularity throughout the story. Mr. Shug is Celie's first love and Mr. is mistress. After enabling Celie to understand she has an attraction to women and convincing the generally combative Mr. that she is a woman, Shug appears to be somewhat of a force of nature throughout the story. A knowledgeable woman, Shug is always there to provide Celie sound advice no matter what the situation calls for. However, Shug is a self-assured woman who is much ahead of her time in terms of her understanding of her own sexuality. Celie seemed to revere and love her for this. Shug is a bit of a bully, and the first time she meets Celie, she disparages her looks. She might also be self-centered when it comes to her sexual relationships. However, Shug's purple outfit is the inspiration for the book's title, and she appears to bring color to the lives of everyone she comes into contact with. Nettie, Celie's younger sister. To set the scene, Celie admits to hiding Nettie from their father whenever she could, and Nettie is still believed to be in school despite Celie having to leave because of her pregnancy. Nettie has a passion for learning and will continue her education for as long as she is able. When Nettie realizes that her father may be going to sexually abuse her in the same way that he assaulted Celie, she runs away from her first home. Following her expulsion from Mr.'s home, Nettie bravely builds a new life with the Reverend and his wife, eventually joining them in Africa for missionary work. While Nettie is staying with the Reverend, it appears that she takes on the role of second mother to Celie's children, raising them as if she were her own. Despite the fact that Nettie and Celie hadn't seen each other in years, Nettie continues to write to Celie and doesn't give up when she doesn't hear from Alfonso, Celie and Nettie's father. After finishing the novel, the girls realize that Alfonso was not their biological father after all, and that he was actually their mother's second spouse. Like Mr. Alfonso is a greedy, manipulative jerk who assaults Celie on a daily basis. Alfonso appears to be a pedophile, as he marries two teenage girls after abusing Celie. Only now you know is all Alfonso says to Celie when challenged by her at the end of the novel. Before the end of the novel, he dies. Alice Walker was born on February 9, 1944, in Putnam County, Georgia. Walker was one of 8 children raised by a sharecropper father and a maid mother. Walker faced racial discrimination as a child in the southern United States in the mid-20th century, and he fought to be allowed to attend school. Early registration was a priority for Walker's mother, Minnie Lou. She battled day after day for the rest of Walker's high school career. As a child, Walker began creating stories but kept them private out of fear of her family's disapproval. Walker was shot in the eye with a BB pistol by her brother the same year. She lost her vision in one eye. Although she had suffered a serious accident, Walker was a popular student and was accepted to Spelman College in 1961. In the 1960s, Walker became a prominent figure in the civil rights movement and participated in the March on Washington in 1963. Her marriage to Melvin Roseman Leventhal, a civil rights lawyer, was the first legally married interracial couple to live in Mississippi, and they had 2 children together. Their daughter was born in 1969, but they split soon after. When Walker's first novel, The Third Life of Grange Copeland, was published in 1970, she was one of the leading scholars who helped to revive interest in Zora Neale Hurston. Walker and fellow Hurston lover Charlotte D. Hunt were responsible for discovering her unmarked gravesite in Florida and arranging for a new headstone. It was in 1976 that Walker released Meridian, a novel on the impact of the civil rights movement on Southern activists. Walker's best-known work, The Color Purple, was published in 1982 and adapted for the screen in 1985, earning 11 Academy Award nominations. There were several more novels written by Walker, including a follow-up to The Color Purple called Possessing the Secret of Joy, but none of them received the same critical acclaim as The Color Purple. Walker has also published several short story collections and poetry, and has released new novels as recently as 2013. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.